Welcome to the cityCURRENT radio show. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta. Today, we're talking about the revitalization of cities, nonprofits, and companies with Storm Cunningham, Executive Director of RECONOMICS Institute, the Society of Revitalization and Resilience Professionals, which helps ensure that communities worldwide have certified revitalization and resilience facilitators. Storm, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me on your show.
For those who are wondering what RECONOMICS is, give listeners an idea to what it means.
This entire global economy has been growing really, really fast over the past few decades. And my most recent book, RECONOMICS, just came out last year. And it takes that whole dynamic, this trend of basing economic growth on revitalizing the places we've already developed and on restoring the natural resources that we've damaged along the way, and turns it into an actual process for revitalization, as opposed to just a catalog of regenerative activities. And the reason I wrote that book was that I've spent the last 20 years since that first book came out as primarily a workshop facilitator, public speaker. So I've been at all of these, literally hundreds of revitalization, regeneration, redevelopment summits and planning meetings and conferences and conventions all over the world. And for every talk I give, I usually hang around and listen to at least a dozen others. So over the last 20 years, I've probably heard more stories of success and failure as regards community revitalization than maybe anybody else on the planet. And so I've been watching for commonalities, what's usually present in the successes, what's usually missing in the failures. I figured that despite the fact that every community's got its own problems, its own dreams, its own political situation and legal situation, no matter where they are in the world, there have got to be some commonalities because cities share a lot more common things than they have in contrast to each other. Just like human beings, we're a lot more alike than we are different, even though we focus on our differences a lot. So that was all distilled into this latest book, RECONOMICS. It was what was missing. What do all these communities that are spending so much money and effort on trying to revitalize themselves and fail? 90% of these initiatives fail. Why are they failing? What's missing?
We are coming out of potentially this over a year and a half long pandemic. What are some of the best ways to help a community economically recover from this COVID-19 calamity?
It's really not that much different from what they needed to do before, because the essence of what was driving failure before still needs to be addressed. And yes, the situation's more urgent as a result of COVID, but and in many ways that urgency is kind of a good thing. I mean, we needed more urgency in terms of addressing our communities. And the problem a lot of communities have is that they treat revitalization as something that you do when you get into trouble. It's like people who only think about their health when they're sick and don't try to live a healthier lifestyle or eat better or exercise more, anything like that until they've got a problem. And cities are the same way. And the fact is, revitalization is something that we need to be working on constantly. It's like our bodies maintain their health because they're constantly regenerating, replacing, rearranging. And cities need to do the same. If a city isn't revitalizing, it's devitalizing. There's no such thing as healthy stasis. So if you don't have a revitalization program, you're going downhill.
What are some of you talked about, being one of the world's expert because you've been exposed to so many lessons learned when it comes to community revitalization. What are some of the most inspiring and dramatic stories of places coming back to life that you've witnessed?
To me, the most exciting stories have two things in common. One is that they're dramatic in terms of the level of desolation they were in prior to the effort and the level of revitalization they achieved. But the other aspect is that I'm excited about the communities that did this in such a way that it's replicable by other communities. Now, some places revitalized just from dumb luck. They happen to do the right thing at the right time, or the right employer happened to arrive at just the right time to catalyze a rebirth. And that's the nature of complex systems, which is what a city is that sometimes they'll display behaviors that you can't really trace back to any particular cause, as just complexity at work. But it's probably not a responsible thing for a community leader to rely on dumb luck and just hope that the right thing happens at the right time. So the places that have really excited me were ones like Chattanooga, Tennessee, that I'm sure you're very familiar with that story.
Yeah.
I actually, in my second book, the McGraw-Hill book in 2008, reWealth, I actually did a case study on Chattanooga. And it had both of those qualities. One was, that Chattanooga in the 70s was just in a death spiral. You had to drive with your headlights on in the middle of the day. The air quality was so bad, had racial problems, class distinction problems. It was hemorrhaging jobs like crazy. I mean, it was going downhill fast. Walter Cronkite got on national TV and said Chattanooga's the filthiest city in America. And that catalyzed a feeling of community pride where the EPA had just launched their clean air initiative. In fact, the EPA had really only just been created. And Chattanooga decided, okay, let's see if we can work together and clean up our air and win a clean air award. And in actual fact, Chattanooga became the first national winner of the EPA's Clean Air Award. And the experience of learning how to work together, which they had never done before, inspired them to think, well, where do we go now? We've achieved that. Now that we're working together, why don't we just revitalize the whole place? And they actually put together what might have been the world's first complete strategic renewal process. Most communities, they revitalize or they try to revitalize just by doing a bunch of projects, just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Or they'll do visioning exercise, get everybody together, and and it feels good. It's nice to have a vision. It's nice to know where you're going, but that's usually where they leave it. They'll do a visioning session and stick it on the shelf, or they'll do a plan. They'll spend $100,000 on a comprehensive plan, a revitalization plan, a strategic plan, whatever they call it, and again, stick it on the shelf. They think that writing a plan is somehow progress, that it's action. It's not, it's a document. And the trouble is that people think because they have a plan that they must be revitalizing, so nothing else happens. And 5 or 10 years later, they discover, oh, you know what? The plan's out of date. We need to renew it. And it's a syndrome I call perpetual planning syndrome. That's one of the big things that stifles revitalization. But Chattanooga put together an ongoing program, which is one of the key elements. There are 6 elements to a strategic renewal process, a minimum process. You can add to it, but you can't take away. You got to have these 6 elements. So you got to have an ongoing program. You've got to have a vision. You've got to have a strategy to achieve that vision. You've got to have policies to support the vision and the strategy. You've got to have partnerships to bring in the resources that you need to actually do projects, which is the last element. So program, vision, strategy, policies, partnerships, projects. And the secret sauce that makes this turn into revitalization is that each one of those 6 elements needs to be regenerative in nature. And that's what Chattanooga did. And they've kind of lost some elements of their process over time in the recent decade or so. But what took them from a death spiral in the 70s to being a global poster child of revitalization in the 90s was the creation of a complete process.
I love that case study because, of course, regionally where we are, we're able to visit Chattanooga in just a few hours drive, both from Memphis and Nashville. But I think it's cool too to see that their tourism and their government being able to really use tactical urbanism to bring forth some really cool ideas. And when you visit Chattanooga, it's a very collaborative community now. And I'm sure that a lot of that that revitalization effort helped Chattanooga become more collaborative instead of working in silos. And of course, there's still some, like you said, it's not as maybe as great as it was in the 90s, but now being able to have this collaborative effort, it really does move a city forward. And like you said, it's not just a check the box. We did the revitalization plan, and now we're not going to actually get our hands dirty, because that's where the work actually makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really cool. What do you think causes most community revitalization or resilience initiatives to fail?
It gets back to that process. It's weird that you talk to any intelligent person, especially anyone who produces something, whether it's a farmer or a factory owner or somebody running a government agency that collects tax revenues, whatever it is they produce, they've got a process for it, and they can describe it. A process is the essence of management. That's what makes a manager, is having a process. Uh, the weird thing is that just about every community I go to doesn't have a process for what they say they want to create. So how do you reliably produce resilience or revitalization or whatever your community goal is if you don't actually have a process for it? So deep down, all these community leaders know that, but nobody's ever presented them with a template. Nobody said, look, here's your minimum viable process. So they'll kind of intuitively create some of those elements. They'll do the visioning session. They'll create some partnerships, maybe even work on their policies a bit, but it's all kind of hit or miss because they don't really know what they're shooting for. They don't know when they've completed, got a complete process together so they can really move forward. So that's what I documented in RECONOMICS, is that missing element. And that's what we do at RECONOMICS Institute, is when we certify revitalization and resilience facilitators, that's all they're providing. They're not redevelopment finance experts. They're not handling the legal end of things. They're not architects or engineers, although some of them are. Some of them are all those things. But that's not the essence of what we're teaching. We're teaching the process so that when they show up at a planning meeting or revitalization summit or whatever it is, and the community describes what they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve it, there's somebody in the room who says, well, yeah, but this is good, that's good, but where's the policy support? Or they'll find out where the gap is and help them plug that gap to help achieve success. And one of the biggest common things that's missing is a strategy. Everybody uses the word strategy, but very few leaders really know what a strategy is.
There's a lot of people that may say, well, I'm not in politics, or I am not in a nonprofit, so I don't really, or focus on revitalization, so I don't really have the expertise to move a community forward. But how can someone refocus their current expertise to become a local leader of community renewal?
I mean, one of our more recent graduates, just a couple of months ago, has spent the last 20 years as a lawyer, not working any particular field that's related to communities or nature or anything like that, just kind of usual lawyer stuff, and wasn't very happy, got kind of burned out, and was looking at leaving the profession entirely. And he came across RECONOMICS Institute and got certified as a revitalization resilience facilitator simply because he wanted to add something to his life, something to his profession that felt like he was leaving the world a better place. And the tagline of RECONOMICS Institute is improving the process of improving places. That's where the leverage point is. And that's what he wanted to do. And now, less than 2 months after he graduated, he's on the board of directors of one of the largest natural resource restoration and regional revitalization initiatives in the country. Purely because he got certified, purely because they wanted somebody at the table who actually understood how to improve the chances of success. They were spending over $1 billion on this, but didn't really have anybody in the room who knew how to turn that $1 billion into $1 billion worth of success. Or even if they were successful, how to multiply the return on that investment.
So, how can we grow our local economy in a way that benefits low income minorities and helps heal past injustices?
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, it gets back to that process again. Each element of that process has a different value. From a standpoint of making sure the revitalization initiative is inclusive of all economic levels, inclusive of all races and any other differentiators that we tend to put on people, and inclusive of all institutions, nonprofit, academic, business, government. Uh, there's one place in that process where all that really comes together, and that's the vision. If you do a really good job of creating a shared vision, and all a vision is a cohesive set of goals. So if you do a really good job of getting all the stakeholders involved in creating that cohesive set of goals for the community, and then you've got the other elements of the process that are all based on achieving that vision, then you really don't need to do that much stakeholder engagement at other points in the process, because they've been engaged at the key point that's driving the strategy, the policies, the partnerships, the projects. So as long as that process is really focused on the vision, you don't need to do a stakeholder engagement process or session every time you launch a new project, which is really a bad idea to do that. A lot of projects die as a result of that. Stakeholder engagement's got its time and place, and during a project launch is not the time and place for it. These redevelopers are working on borrowed money. The last thing they want is a delay. So you do need to do your stakeholder engagement up front and not wait until this guy's interest bill is piling up and then say, oh, now wait a minute, did you think of this?
Now, what puts a smile on your face when you look at the work that you're able to do each and every day?
My entire field of work puts a smile on my face because it's all focused on making places better, which makes people better. One of the slogans that I use is, what we restore restores us. What we revitalize revitalizes us. So I have the privilege of being around and reading about and talking about and writing about the people who are doing all this wonderful work. I don't do any of this useful stuff myself. All I do is write about it and talk about it, what other people are doing. But being exposed to all this restoration, revitalization, redevelopment, regeneration, repurposing, reconnecting, renewing, is just endlessly inspiring. You can't possibly get tired of it.
You really are learning every day, and being able to share it with others is such a gift. Where can people go to learn more about you, support your efforts, and purchase your book?
If you go to stormcunningham.com, that's my public speaking site, and I've got links to everything I'm involved with, links to the 3 books, links to Revitalization, which is the journal that I edit, comes out twice a month at revitalization.org, which is how I really stay on top of all this stuff, because I've got to put out this journal, which now has over 8,500 articles in it in the past issues. I've got to put this out on a daily basis. It comes out on the 1st and 15th of the month, but I've got to feed it every day. And RECONOMICS.org is the RECONOMICS Institute, but you can find it all at stormcunningham.com.
Well, Storm, thank you so much for coming on the City Current Radio Show.
Thanks, Andrew. Enjoyed it.